So, and without further ado, I will begin this presentation and discussion with the first keynote speaker is Dr. Katrina Liku from Melbourne. She is Associate Professor at the Department of International Relations and also Deputy Director of Monash GPS, Gender, Peace and Security, Monash University, Melbourne, Australia. She wrote a numerous interesting book, Gender in IR, and her most recent book publication are Young Women and Leadership, right? Dr. Katrina, thank you for joining with us today. I hand it over to you.
Lovely. Thank you, Sartika, for your warm welcome. And thank you also to the first Vice Chancellor of Alunga University for your very warm welcome. And it's very nice to see so many friends from the Gender and IR Indonesia community here today. Thanks also for allowing me to deliver my speech in English. I've been practicing my Bahasa, but I'm still not confident enough to deliver my talk. So thank you. So I'm delivering this talk, as the first Vice Chancellor mentioned, from Melbourne, Australia, where some of you might know we've just entered stage 4 lockdown due to the coronavirus. In July, COVID-19 had escaped the hotels where the international travellers had been quarantined who were coming back into Melbourne. And since then, the coronavirus has entered Melbourne's aged care sector, where we have seen most of the COVID deaths among our elderly population. Now there's also community transmission, which has led this week to schools and childcare centres being closed down, to children being schooled from home by their parents, and only essential workers are allowed to work outside of the home. The rest of us need to stay within 5 kilometres of our house. So we all have our own stories of how COVID-19 has created real challenges to how we live, how we work, and how we care for one another. And as we pass the grim milestone this week of 17 million infections worldwide, the pandemic has had a devastating impact upon many, with different nations, regions, ethnic and religious groups, ages, and socioeconomic classes all facing their own unique challenges. And while it's important that we think about all of these different identity issues, I'm here today, of course, to talk about gender. In this brief talk, I would like to discuss the role of women's global leadership and some of the different gendered experiences of women and how women are responding to the pandemic, with a few comments about my own hometown of Melbourne. So the first thing I would like to discuss is the role of women's global leadership during the pandemic. A number of you might have noted some newspaper articles in the media and in the New York Times particularly that has stated that the death rate from COVID-19 is 6 times higher in countries with male leaders than in countries with female leaders. It's also noted that governments with female leaders have been quicker and more effective at flattening the epidemic's curve than countries that have male leaders. So this seems like important figures. But why is this the case? There's been some suggestion, especially in the media, that the reason that women-led countries are doing better in the crisis is because women are more caring, and therefore they're more likely to be better leaders during a public health crisis. However, I think recent research suggests that there might be other factors at play. Importantly, research is suggesting that countries that have women leaders generally have higher rates of gender equality. These countries are more diverse in their leadership teams and their governance structures, and they're more inclusive of the diverse social issues that shape their community. So it may also be the case that nations that include diversity in leadership are more inclusive and therefore better at collectively mobilising effective pandemic responses that reach all aspects of the community. All of this allows them to be better prepared and to have a more of a community engaged and community responsive approach to the global pandemic. And here we might be able to compare the responses, at least in Western states, of New Zealand's Jacinda Ardern, the Prime Minister of New Zealand. And New Zealand has effectively been able to eradicate the coronavirus when compared to the United States, led by Donald Trump, where they continue to be amongst the world's worst infected nations. And some of this is supported by recent research from Georgetown University in Washington that has found that countries that support women's inclusion, women's justice and security, that is, countries that openly support women's rights, appear to be less affected by the pandemic. Alternatively, nations that exclude women from social, economic and political life and perpetuate injustice and insecurity for women are less prepared for major crises like the coronavirus pandemic. This might be because these countries are unable to draw upon a depth of knowledge about how different sections of the community are experiencing the virus. In particular, they are unable to understand how men and women, as gender-specific groups, will experience and be able to respond and adapt to the challenges posed by the pandemic. So in short, this research is suggesting that where women are in leadership positions and where women's rights and where women's rights and inclusion in decision making is supported, that countries are producing better responses to COVID. But while this may seem important, the reality is, of course, that women are absent from senior leadership and governance roles, and this is clear during the pandemic. If we look at scientific communities, at national parliaments that are making decisions, at civil service and media outlets all around the world who are playing very crucial responses to COVID-19, we are also seeing that these areas lack gender parity. Currently, there are only 14 countries in the world where at least half of their cabinet ministers are women. We know that just 25% of representatives in national parliaments globally are women. And only a quarter of the world's senior health positions are filled by women. But of course, this is in spite of the fact that women constitute almost 70% of the labour force in the global health sector worldwide. So a consequence of the lack of women in leadership positions is that around the world, the COVID response has, on the whole, not been gender responsive. Many of the policies that are designed by states and by regions within states are not effectively thinking about how the pandemic affects men and women differently and how the responses and policies that they are creating might create disadvantage. What this means is that the decisions that have been taken in many countries, including Australia, the United States and elsewhere, to do things like enact COVID-19 emergency laws or widespread health responses, or thinking about lockdown policies or financial relief packages, are likely to be male-dominated decisions. This means that there is a risk that of the potential that these policies will ignore the unique experiences and challenges that women face. In Australia, for instance, there's a concern about this. There's a concern, of course, around the world, but in Australia, that the pandemic is going to lead to an economic recession. But in Australia, some journalists are calling this not just an economic recession, but an economic she-cession, where they argue that the negative financial impacts will be disproportionately felt by women. And commentators argue that there's a number of reasons for this. First, women are overrepresented in the precarious job labour forces in areas where they have lost their job. So women are overrepresented in part-time work in Australia, in insecure or contract work, and in industries that have had to be shut down because of the lockdown. And this is echoed around the world. Globally, early estimates suggest that women are nearly 2 times more likely to lose their job as a result of the pandemic than men. And again, this may be because they work in industries like cafes and salons, etc., that have been locked down. Furthermore, in some countries, the support packages that provide financial relief for the pandemic can prioritise men's work and don't effectively support industries like childcare. So in Australia, there's been a big debate about how much we support the childcare industry, because failures to support childcare and to make it cheap and readily available for families often means that women have to stop working in order to care for children who are home from school. So Australia, like many countries, has implemented a really large economic rescue package that is designed to keep people in jobs and to help people who currently aren't able to work because of the pandemic. However, this financial package has focused a lot of its investment in construction and in heavy industry sectors, that is, areas that predominantly employ men. So women have found that they have very little support when it comes to their economic recovery. And while they may have little paid work, one area where we find that women's work has dramatically increased, of course, is in their caregiving roles. Around the world, we find that women's roles as caregivers has dramatically increased. And this is true both in the paid sector, but also in the unpaid sector. We know that around the world, women are on the front line of the pandemic because they constitute the majority of nurses in hospitals, but they are also globally the majority of workers and care workers in the aged care sector, looking after the elderly, and in the childcare sector, looking after children. They are also disproportionately taking on the unpaid care roles at home. They're doing the homeschooling of children and they're caring for other family members. And this is causing enormous stress upon women whose responsibilities to the family and the community has massively increased and in many ways become more dangerous because of the pandemic. We also know that women have become more vulnerable to family or domestic violence, particularly during periods of lockdown. According to recent research that was conducted by my own research centre, Monash Gender, Peace and Security, the incidences and severity of domestic violence has increased in Australia during the COVID-19 restrictions. We found that 50% of workers in Victoria, which is the state that I'm in, have reported an increase in both the number of cases of domestic violence, but also in their severity. In a northern state of Queensland, where I grew up, 70% of practitioners said that they were seeing an escalation in the violence that was experienced by women in their own homes. Similarly, we are finding that the pandemic has had a major impact on efforts to promote women's human rights around the world and to support the delivery of humanitarian aid to women in need, particularly in refugee camps. In research again conducted by my own centre earlier this year, we found that the pandemic is significantly hampering women's rights promotion, and that women's peace and security work throughout Asia and the Pacific is suffering greatly because of the pandemic. This is occurring because of a loss of funding for existing programs where countries can no longer afford or are no longer willing to pay for development and humanitarian programs in their aid budget. But we're also seeing a loss of job security for humanitarian workers. We're seeing humanitarian workers themselves becoming vulnerable to the pandemic, and that they have difficulty in accessing vulnerable populations safely. So, for instance, there have been periods where the Cox's Bazar refugee camp in Bangladesh, which houses close to 1 million Rohingya refugees, has needed to be closed down, and only a very minimal amount of humanitarian actors have been allowed to access those camps. The result of this is often that women's needs go unmet. So we are also finding that women are losing access to essential health care, including particularly maternal health care. Because of the pandemic, pregnant women cannot access the health care they need to safely give birth and then to recover from childbirth. This has led leaders in Papua New Guinea to recently tell women that they should wait at least until next year if they are deciding to get pregnant. This, of course, does not help or support those women in Papua New Guinea who are the victims of sexual violence. So this will have a major impact in poorer countries, in lower socioeconomic groups, as well as those, as I mentioned, in refugee camps. So in order to recover from the pandemic, we need to ensure that the experiences, needs, and voices of women, who are of course over half of the world's population, are included. This means that around the world, COVID policies need to be gender responsive, and they need to be inclusive of women leaders. This includes women political leaders at the highest ends of government, including in COVID response teams, but it also means we need to ensure that women community leaders, women healthcare professionals, and those working in the humanitarian, security, and peace building sectors are included. This ensures that women's voices are heard, and there is a greater chance that we will be able to include the experiences of women during this pandemic. So I'll leave it there with that thought, and I look forward very much to hearing all of the papers today as we work towards understanding what women's roles in the pandemic have been, what their experiences are, and how we can collectively work towards a gender responsive COVID policy. So thank you again for the kind invitation to come and speak to you today. I look forward to hearing the rest of the papers. Terima kasih.
Terima kasih, Dr. Katrina. Thank you very much for your thoughtful presentation. You are very, you bring our concern about how women still marginalized, unrecognized, their need and undervalued during this pandemic, despite the women in front line to confront the risk of the pandemic. Okay, now we move now for the second keynote speaker. I have pleasure to introduce Dr. Phil Tuti Kuspardiati, Associate Professor of Department of Anthropology, Erlangga University. Currently, she is also Director of the Ethnographic Museum and Death Study Center, Erlangga University. And I think this is the only type of museum that exists in Indonesia or in the world. So, Dr. Tuti, thank you for your availability today. Now I hand it over to you.
Terima kasih, Bu Sartika. Selamat siang, teman-teman semua. Halo, Katrina. Nice to hear from you. And please allow me to speak in bahasa, okay? Thank you. Baik, baik. Yang akan saya sampaikan adalah sebagian dari awal penelitian kami dari CSWS dan juga penelitian saya sendiri secara pribadi untuk melihat ini. Yang saya lihat adalah tentang faktor risiko sosial pandemi. Jadi ternyata COVID-19 ini juga selain faktor-faktor yang bersifat biologis, kedokteran dan sebagainya, ternyata ada faktor risiko sosial yang selama ini lepas dari ini kita, dari pandangan kita. Baiklah, berikutnya.
Next
slide berikutnya, tolong. Saya tidak bisa mengendalikan dari sini.
Mbak Afi, tolong di slide.
Okay. Sudah di-over ke saya. Baik, seperti kita ketahui bahwa sejarah perkembangan penyakit infeksi, termasuk yang COVID sekarang ini mengindikasikan bahwa penyakit menular itu berkembang seiring dengan perkembangan masyarakat. Artinya, ketika masyarakat semakin maju, maka pola dan juga penyakit itu sendiri berkembang sesuai dengan perkembangan masyarakat itu. Misalnya, ketika ada kolonisasi beberapa ratus tahun yang lalu, ketika orang-orang Eropa mulai menjelajah ke Amerika Latin atau menjelajah ke Asia, termasuk ke Indonesia, kemudian tanpa kita sadari sebenarnya kontak ini itu membawa oleh-oleh gitu ya. Jadi misalnya seperti yang terjadi di Amerika Latin, itu ketika Eropa masuk ke Amerika Latin, dia membawa sifilis, sedangkan ketika mereka pulang, dia membawa malaria dari lokal. Jadi peristiwa ini adalah gambaran yang paling gampang ketika kita tahu bahwa pendudukan baru itu selalu menghasilkan penyakit-penyakit baru. Kalau misalnya kita bicara hal ini tentang penyakit gitu ya. Kemudian migrasi tentu saja tanpa kita sadari, misalnya HIV/AIDS, kemudian penyakit-penyakit semacam hepatitis dan sebagainya, itu juga terbawa lewat migrasi. Perumahan kumuh, perumahan yang sesak gitu ya, yang densitasnya tinggi. Ini juga tanpa kita sadari dari sejarah perkembangan masyarakat itu juga sudah menunjukkan bahwa perumahan kumuh ini juga berdampak banyak dan positif terhadap penularan penyakit-penyakit infeksi gitu ya. Lalu jenis pekerjaan seperti tadi disampaikan oleh Katrina bahwa ini juga signifikan terhadap penularan penyakit misalnya, atau tidak hanya penularan penyakit tapi signifikan betul dengan persoalan-persoalan gender. Kemudian adanya perubahan lingkungan, bagaimana kita secara masif merusak lingkungan, dan juga tingkat pendidikan kita yang barangkali belum seragam, serta yang terakhir ada lifestyle. Perubahan pola makan, perubahan cara kita memperlakukan makanan itu sendiri itu juga sangat berpengaruh terhadap timbulnya penyakit, termasuk penyakit infeksi. Nah, contoh yang paling gampang kita lihat itu adalah misalnya kalau kita ingat lepra adalah penyakit yang sebenarnya juga berkaitan dibawa kemana oleh para Buddha itu. Artinya persoalan migrasi itu sangat membawa ini, dan penularan ini juga menjadi masif ketika migrasi dari satu tempat ke tempat yang lain menjadi semakin cepat. Misalnya saat ini dalam waktu 3 jam saya sudah sampai di Perth misalnya, atau dalam waktu 12 jam saya sudah mencapai Eropa. Dan itu berarti kecepatan migrasi ini juga berperan penting dalam penularan. Nah, hal ini menunjukkan bahwa persebaran penyakit menular itu tidak hanya disebabkan oleh faktor yang bersifat biologis sebenarnya. Tidak hanya karena saya berdekatan dengan siapa, maka saya akan menularkan sesuatu, tetapi juga faktor yang bersifat sosial. Yang tadi juga sudah diceritakan oleh Katrina bahwa persoalan-persoalan double burden pada perempuan itu juga sangat signifikan terkait dengan misalnya perempuan itu memang sangat care gitu ya terhadap keluarganya, tapi dia lupa kadang-kadang kecemasannya itu membawa sesuatu yang lain gitu dalam peristiwa penularan penyakit. Artinya kalau misalnya selama ini faktor penyebab penyakit infeksi seringkali hanya dikaitkan dengan faktor biologis, tetapi kurang memperhatikan faktor sosial sebagai faktor risiko terhadap penularan penyakit infeksi. Nah, kalau kita bicara tentang faktor risiko sosial, itu selalu dikait-kaitkan dengan kemiskinan dan ketimpangan sosial. Dan kita sudah bisa tebak kalau bercerita tentang ketimpangan sosial, maka ini adalah persoalan gender. Dan dengan demikian kita sudah tahu siapa yang paling banyak ada di pasar saat ini. Bukan persoalan kebutuhan untuk konsumtif, tapi karena tadi itu persoalan double burden di keluarga untuk caring terhadap kehidupan, terhadap gizi dan sebagainya yang ada di keluarga. Nah, faktor kemiskinan, ketimpangan sosial dan sebagainya ini yang kemudian dapat kita ambil untuk mempengaruhi sebut sebagai faktor yang mempengaruhi penularan penyakit, sekalipun tidak secara langsung seperti halnya faktor biologis. Kalau misalnya saya dapat virus ya saya akan sakit. Tetapi faktor sosial itu tidak secara langsung berpengaruh, tapi dia menjadi semacam perantara gitu ya, untuk menjadi sakit itu. Oleh karena itu kemudian faktor risiko sosial ini mempunyai kekuatan yang sama dengan faktor biologis. Karena bidang ilmu saya adalah sedikit ada biologisnya, sehingga saya berani menyempilkan sedikit tentang persoalan-persoalan ini dari aspek biologis. Next. Nah, perkembangan berikutnya kalau misalnya kita lihat bahwa flu Spanyol itu di tahun 1918 itu juga terjadi di Indonesia, termasuk pes yang membunuh sekian ribu penduduk di Eropa ya. Flu Spanyol sebenarnya tidak berasal dari Spanyol, tapi karena waktu itu berkembang pesatnya dari Spanyol, maka kemudian disebut flu Spanyol. Dan kalau misalnya kita lihat, itu karena perang, karena segala macam, artinya faktor sosial lah yang menyebabkan flu Spanyol itu semakin merebak di seluruh dunia, termasuk kemudian SARS, termasuk kemudian MERS dan sebagainya sampai sekarang COVID-19. Dan kalau misalnya kita lihat penularan COVID-19, kemudian kita ingat cerita bahwa COVID-19 itu adalah semacam zoonosis kan yang ditularkan dari hewan ke manusia. Tetapi bukan persoalan penularan hewan ke manusia, tapi persoalan budaya yang menyebabkan terjadinya penularan ini. Sehingga kalau misalnya kita lihat COVID itu disebabkan karena orang mengkonsumsi binatang liar misalnya dan sebagainya. Bukan persoalan binatang liarnya, tapi tradisi untuk memakan binatang liar itu yang kemudian menjadi persoalan sosial yang kita lihat sekarang. Artinya bahwa COVID-19 itu adalah influenza, jenis influenza yang sangat mudah menular, jelas. Virusnya sudah tahu kita dari SARS-CoV-2 gitu ya. Nah, di Indonesia belum menampakkan penurunan angka infeksi yang signifikan. Jadi sangat sayang karena terjadi, kita sudah tahu semua bagaimana kejadian ini menjadikan Indonesia lahan subur untuk bertumbuhnya COVID, dan termasuk dalam hal ini kita juga sudah tahu agak berseberangan dengan yang disampaikan oleh Katrina bahwa pemimpin perempuan itu yang akan care terhadap kita, terhadap penyakit, tetapi tidak terjadi di Jawa Timur dan tidak terjadi di Surabaya. Mengapa? Saya belum tahu jawabannya, tapi intinya adalah kemudian terjadi persoalan yang sangat bertolak belakang dengan yang disampaikan oleh Katrina terkait dengan pemimpin perempuan. Nah, khususnya yang saat ini Surabaya itu masih merupakan daerah hitam, artinya menduduki tertinggi infeksi. Tingginya penularan COVID itu menurut kemudian studi-studi yang saya baca dan kemudian saya melihat penelitian-penelitian yang juga saya lakukan sendiri dan juga bersama JSWS, COVID-19 perlu dianalisis dari aspek faktor risiko sosial, bukan hanya persoalan biologis atau bukan persoalan bagaimana kita menangani penularan. Artinya bahwa kalau misalnya kita lihat contoh paling gampang yang tadi sudah saya sampaikan, di pasar yang paling banyak, Bu Sartika melihat sendiri itu, yang paling banyak adalah perempuan. Dan kalau pakai masker, pakai, tetapi ditaruh di dagu, bukan ditaruh di mulut untuk menutupi hidung dan pernafasan untuk supaya tidak terlibat dengan orang lain. Next. Nah, akhirnya yang saya temukan dalam penelitian ini atau yang saya ingin bongkar dalam penelitian ini bahwa ada ignorance ya, ada ketidakpatuhan terhadap protokol kesehatan sehingga asumsi saya itu yang akan meningkatkan infeksi. Jadi angka infeksi akan terus tinggi karena kita tidak mematuhi protokol kesehatan. Dan itu bisa dilihat bagaimana ketika mall dibuka karena ada seruan, oh ini ada new normal yang seperti disampaikan oleh Prof. Nyoman tadi, bahwa new normal itu dianggap sebagai normal, gitu ya, sudah boleh kemana-mana. Dan itu yang dipahami oleh masyarakat. Artinya masyarakat yang harus melalui protokol kesehatan itu tidak terjadi gitu. Artinya protokol kesehatan oke, tapi tidak dilakukan. Oleh karena itu kemudian dugaan kita, hipotesis kami itu adalah yang menyebabkan tingginya angka infeksi. Nah, secara sederhana supaya tidak tertular, harusnya masyarakat itu melakukan protokol kesehatan, tapi kenyataannya di lapangan protokol kesehatan tidak dilakukan dengan baik. Next.
Ya, mungkin saya kira sudah habis PPT-nya itu, selesai.
Belum, masih ada kok, Bu. Ya, jadi ini yang beberapa yang sebelum terakhir. Artinya kemudian saya melihat bahwa masyarakat itu karena tidak mematuhi protokol kesehatan, maka terjadi infeksi. Oleh karena itu, untuk melihat mengapa protokol kesehatan tidak dilakukan, kita melihat filter yang saya sebut sebagai faktor risiko sosial untuk melihat mengapa angka infeksi di Jawa Timur atau di Surabaya sebagai fokus penelitian kita itu kemudian menyebabkan infeksi yang lebih tinggi. Next. Nah, ini adalah contoh faktor risiko sosial yang saya temukan. Jadi kita melihat tadi gender itu terkena betul itu. Kalau misalnya kita tadi sudah melihat bahwa kemiskinan adalah faktor risiko sosial yang utama, itu kemudian kita tambah dengan spiritualitas misalnya. Kita tahu sendiri banyaknya jenazah yang sudah dibungkus dengan SOP COVID, tapi kemudian dibongkar lagi gitu ya, karena dia percaya ini harus disempurnakan, disucikan, dan sebagainya, dan sebagainya. Terus kemudian banyak sekali pembicaraan-pembicaraan, enggak apa-apa, COVID itu kan tergantung pada Tuhan, meteorit tergantung pada Tuhan gitu ya. Jadi COVID itu juga ciptaan Tuhan. Ini persoalan spiritualitas, yang memang agak susah untuk dibongkar. Lantas ini tadi juga disebut-sebut oleh Katrina tentang kebijakan pemerintah. Kebijakan pemerintah kita, orang banyak melihat bahwa ada kebingungan ya, ada ketidakseimbangan, ada ketidaksamaan dan ketidakseragaman tentang kebijakan pemerintah. Mana yang harus dituruti karena persoalan konflik antar pimpinan misalnya. Artinya bahwa kebijakan pemerintah menjadi kacau sekarang karena orang tidak tahu lagi. Kalau misalnya rapid test, mana harganya berapa, tidak semua orang tahu dan sebagainya. Intinya adalah kemudian kebijakan pemerintah ini membawa persoalan pada pelayanan kesehatan. Kalau misalnya kita mau jujur ya, yang satu berharga sekian, yang satu berharga sekian, dan itu membuat pelayanan menjadi berbeda, yang satu APD-nya kurang dan sebagainya. Dan ini semua kita sudah mendengar dan bukan rahasia lagi untuk masing-masing rumah sakit rujukan. Artinya kemudian kita akan lari, yang sekarang berkembang adalah stigma. Setelah kemudian gender tentu saja otomatis terkena, kemudian stigma. Ini yang persoalan-persoalan yang saya temukan di lapangan terkait dengan faktor risiko sosial. Next. Nah, beberapa literatur yang saya baca itu menyatakan bahwa secara biologis perempuan itu lebih tahan infeksi sebenarnya dibanding laki-laki, karena di kromosom X-nya kita menyimpan potensi dari enzim yang bisa menggempur infeksi itu dengan sangat kuat ya. Dan laki-laki lebih rentan terhadap infeksi. Hanya saja perempuan itu lebih rentan terhadap kecemasan dibanding laki-laki. Jadi kalau sudah cemas, kemudian akan berlaku yang misalnya bingung dan sebagainya, dan mereka akan memakai misalnya masker tapi tidak di tempatnya, tapi ada di bawah dagu atau di hidung dan sebagainya, hanya karena sebagai ketentuan harus memakai masker misalnya. Nah, survei yang dilakukan oleh Harlianti menunjukkan ada perbedaan yang signifikan antara laki dan perempuan terkait dengan kepatuhan physical distancing. Kita ingat bahwa protokol kesehatan salah satunya adalah physical distancing. Kemudian saya membaca juga dari survei nasional menunjukkan bahwa perempuan itu lebih memahami dan mematuhi physical distancing. Tetapi apa kenyataannya? Next. Nah, kemudian disebutkan juga dari BPS, perempuan lebih khawatir berada di luar rumah dan lebih sering menggunakan masker. Perempuan lalu disebut sebagai lebih disiplin dan lebih sering cuci tangan. Perempuan lebih khawatir terhadap kesehatannya dibanding laki-laki. Itu adalah data-data BPS berdasarkan survei, dan data di atas menunjukkan bahwa perempuan memang lebih memahami tentang protokol kesehatan. Next. Artinya dia lebih care ya. Berikutnya. Nah, temuan lapangan yang kemudian kita sudah kumpulkan dari CSWS dan juga dari saya pribadi untuk penelitian yang lainnya, menunjukkan bahwa hasil pengamatan perempuan lebih berani keluar rumah ternyata. Dan ini terkait dengan kecemasan tadi untuk menjamin bahwa keluarganya akan aman. Dia akan bekerja di luar karena dia tadi juga sudah disebutkan barangkali adalah yang terdampak karena mereka yang miskin dan yang rentan itu biasanya bekerja di sektor-sektor yang low skill gitu ya, yang tidak terlalu ya.
Dipercepat ya. Maaf.
Sudah ya. Nah, ini adalah aku sampai bingung. Artinya di lapangan kita menemui yang seperti ini gitu ya. Artinya ada satu gap antara survei dan kenyataan di lapangan. Next. Nah, ada saling interaksi antar faktor risiko sosial ya. Jadi kalau misalnya ini terkait dengan yang gender, keamanan pangan itu yang membuat dia cemas, kemiskinan yang membuat dia cemas, beban keluarga membuat perempuan cemas, dan akhirnya pendapatan pun masih kurang, dan akhirnya yang terjadi adalah seperti ini, adalah pelanggaran ignorance terhadap protokol kesehatan. Ketika dia bekerja di pasar, dia tidak mungkin bekerja dengan physical distancing, dan tidak mungkin setiap kali mencuci tangan, dan tidak mungkin harus memakai masker karena risih, tidak biasa, dan sebagainya. Next. Nah, inilah temuan lain dari faktor risiko sosial. Jadi karena perumahan kumuh itu juga tidak memungkinkan physical distancing dan juga mencuci tangan dengan baik karena tidak selalu ada air yang tersedia dan sabun. kemudian akses informasi serta literasi yang membuat mereka tidak tahu harus bagaimana karena kesimpang siuran informasi yang juga diperkuat dengan akses transportasi yang dia tidak mampu membayar transportasi yang lebih bagus, tetapi kemudian dengan public transportation yang memperbesar kemungkinan dia untuk melakukan ignorance terhadap protokol kesehatan. Next. Artinya kesimpulan awal dari penelitian pendahuluan ini adalah bahwa yang saya lihat di lapangan, identifikasi faktor risiko sosial sangat perlu dilakukan untuk menjembatani dan mencari alternatif pendekatan terhadap masyarakat untuk melakukan protokol kesehatan sebagai cara dasar menghindari infeksi. Nah, perlu diperhatikan juga bahwa kemiskinan memang lebih banyak diderita oleh perempuan. Di Jawa Timur kita menyebutnya sebagai feminisasi perempuan karena memang lebih banyak perempuan yang miskin. Nah, gender adalah faktor risiko sosial yang berkelindan dengan faktor-faktor risiko sosial lain. Next. Terima kasih.
Okay. Thank you very much for interesting topic that you share with us, Ibu Dr. Piltuti Kusbariati. I think we agree that women have a great deal risk during this pandemic because women involved in the family, community, going to market every day. So they will be more get exposed from this pandemic. Okay, now we continue our webinar on women's role in handling the global pandemic with a second round presentation from speakers. For the first speaker, I am pleased to present Dr. Ella Prihatin. She is currently lecturer at the International Relations Department, Bina Nusantara University, Indonesia. She has got PhD from University of Western Australia, Perth, and her research deal with issue in women political representation. She has published articles in peer-reviewed journals such as Politics, Gender, Parliament Affairs, Contemporary Politics, and Women's Studies International Forum. And in September 2019, Ella was listed by the Australian newspaper as Australia's top 40 researchers who are less than 10 years into their careers. Dr. Ella, thank you for joining with us. I hand it over to you.
Thank you for the opportunity, Ibu Sartika. Do you wish me to deliver the speech in Bahasa or in English?
Well, it's up to you. Maybe in English because we have audience from overseas.
Right.
If
Okay.
you convenience, please.
Okay. Selamat siang. Good day, everyone. My name is Ella Prihatini, and I'm here representing the BINUS University, Bina Nusantara University. So in this presentation, I'd like to point it out the fact that representation matters. What we've seen so far is that women are continuing are being underrepresented in various aspects, including as the response teams and the plans itself to overcome this pandemic. Maybe before I turn to slide number 2, I just want to re-highlight the fact that representation matters for 3 different meanings. Marian Sauer in 2000 discussed about there are 3 types of representation that we need to always be clear about because there are 3 different meanings. The first one is the representation of interest, ideas, values, perspectives, and experiences. The second one is the representativeness of which includes effects on aspirations and on status of group. And thirdly is the equal right to represent, to participate in decision making and to increase pool of talent. So need to be highlighted in this presentation is that this right for women to participate in public life on an equal basis with men is regulated in the convention that we all know, Article 7, Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women. So the rights to participate does not oblige women to make a difference to public life, but it's simply allowing women to be part of the decision-making processes. Maybe the next slide. Right, as been discussed by other presenters before me, this current pandemic, COVID-19, has multiple facets, including the gendered consequences. The gender consequences is very clear. We don't need to provide any evidence such as the scale and the magnitude of the consequences. But just to highlight a few, women aged 25 to 34 globally are 25% more likely than men to live in extreme poverty because of this pandemic. Second of all, female healthcare workers infected more than male workers. The case here is Spain and Italy, where in Spain you have 72% of those healthcare workers are female who got infected, while only 28% of male being infected. In Italy, the number is 66% versus 34%. And then let's move forward to the gender-based violence. In France, the reports of gender-based in domestic violence increased by 30% since the lockdown. We do agree the fact that it's getting more fragile for women to survive under these circumstances. And also unpaid care work, obviously. Before the COVID-19, we know that women do more unpaid care work around the house or to support other family members. But because of this COVID pandemic, we are experiencing more unpaid care works for women compared to men, despite the fact that they are all working from home, right? So these four gendered consequences are mainly what we are very concerned about. But also in this presentation, I'd like to raise the fact that we also need to be part of the decision-making process because we know that the impact is very close to our heart. We experience it day to day. And then the third slide, please. The third slide is, before I go to this section, I just like to raise you a paper, recently published paper in Politics and Gender about gender and leadership during COVID-19. So the authors of this this paper argues that they argue that before the pandemic, media coverage on female leaders are regularly focusing on, the femininity or the child or childless women as leaders and how they portray this femininity, and to some degree, sometimes often making women in a less preferred positions. But after seeing that different female leaders globally has been performing really well compared to the male leaders, now the media kind of shift their perspectives or their tone in terms of women's femininity as a leader. So we might gonna see now femininity is a good point, even to raise childless leaders such as Merkel, suggesting that she's a scientist, but also she can be very nurturing leader because she's a woman. So that becomes a good side of being a woman nowadays, to become leaders in some countries who perform really well. But that might not be relevant in some areas, such as we've seen in Indonesia. So what's missing? What's missing here is that the response teams. In this slide page number 3, there's a study by CARE. They surveyed 30 countries, right, who established national level committees to respond COVID-19. And the results suggest that there's only one out of 30 countries surveyed that has more women sitting in the committee. There's only one country, and that is Canada. The others have less than 50%, and sometimes is very, very low, less than 10%. So it seems like this is like, reflecting how women fare in parliament, how women fare in executive branch, etc. But this is no more acceptable because we've seen that almost 75% had fewer than 1/3 of female membership. Why women are being excluded in this response teams, which is very, very inappropriate in these terms and in this experience of pandemic. So on average, the CARE survey found that women only made up 34% of all the committees which is still less than the number that we would expect, which is parity or near parity. The fourth page here is a showcase of the United States, please. Page 4. Yeah. So as we can see here, as a case study, America, or the United States, provides us an excellent disclosure or display of how gendered these response teams can be, right? So women works as health workers for 80% of the share, right? 80%. So that means 4 out of 5 of healthcare workers are female, right? But when it comes to leadership positions, then we will see the ratios sharply reduced to 11%, roughly, and then even more smaller portion for women in the White House Coronavirus Task Force, less than 9%. Why is this the case? Various reasons behind this proportion, but this is just another example, a prime example of how the gender gap is very staggering in terms of response teams. And we don't want to see that in the future. Why? Let's go to slide 5, please. Right. There's a study also coming just recently about by Cosme and colleagues about how women's leadership had different kind of like interesting public health outcomes. So the paper basically argues that those countries with female leadership tend to have lesser death per capita and lesser days with death, right? So the left side is suggesting that the blue is women and the red is men leaders, right? So it's been logged, and then see the difference between these two types of leaderships. So if women are performing really well in terms of handling this public health crisis, then why should we let their representation very, very low in the response teams? We need to also acknowledge that women also capable of participating in decision making, and also lots of epidemiologists are female. That's what we need to pursue in this follow-up policies. And lastly, my last slide will be about highlighting the fact how response plans also having a very troubling gender gaps, right? So this is going to be my last slide. So I just want to refocus on this part because this is what we're dealing with day by day. The response plans, right? So we've seen that gender-based violence and sexual and reproductive health, as discussed by my previous speakers, these are two main subjects or topics that are very close to women's interests, right? That we've seen from the core survey is that about 54% of countries surveyed had no action on gender-based violence. So they had no idea what to do with it. They have no plans on what to do with it. Despite clear evidence suggesting that the impact of this crisis are partly, including this GB fee. So without any plans to overcome this, question marks, be very raised here, really like, why don't we have any plans about this? Women being killed by, their spouse, or, someone lives in the same house, and then, violence become really brutal. They don't have plan. Almost slightly above 50% of that. And also, countries that have women leadership, based on this survey, suggesting that the response is more representatives, considering the effects on women and girls. So we can see that having women in leadership is key, is one of the important points that we need to raise because of these facts. So on average, the higher the country's score on the index of having a female leadership, the more likely it was to craft a gendered response. I'll leave that presentation there for further discussion, and I thank you so much for the opportunity and for listening to this presentation. Thank you so much, Ibu Kartika, for the opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ella, for sharing with us such a very important concern. And I think we all agree that we cannot accept the fact that women are still underrepresentation in national response teams and plans. I think we have to be strict with the time. So for the rest speaker, I would like you to talk in sharply 8 minutes. Is it okay? Now we are going to present the following speaker, Pandemi Trimayuni. She graduated from University of Indonesia, and she holds a master degree from the London School of Economic, LSE, UK. Pandey has quite a remarkable provision and various interests, including a lecturer, writer, researchers, editor, and advisor for some international institutions. And she is going to present topic on role of women in handling global economic, particularly women and their roles to solve global economic problems. Pandey, I invite you to take it over, please.
Thank you very much, Ibu Tika, for having me for this webinar. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Pandey Trimayuni. And this afternoon, we will discuss about, I will try to present on women and the economy in Indonesia. Next slide, please. Okay, this is actually, I try to collect some, to get a sense of where is women in the global workforce. So here we have some figures, yeah, that's most of the women actually in the global workforce, they work in the services, yeah. And I believe that what's a big part of the services that done by women in this case actually not only for working within the country but also across the countries, yeah, as migrant workers, for example, especially women domestic workers, yeah. That's where actually Indonesia send quite a lot of a big number, yeah, of women as women domestic workers abroad, like that. And I think Indonesia is here contribute quite a big number in the services sector in the world. And also here we have also some women actually in the industry, in the agriculture, and there are some actually a small number in the leadership, yeah. For example, in the CEO, it's only CEO Fortune 500 companies, yeah. It's only 4% of women actually represented in the biggest companies in the world. And also in the parliament, in general, actually, there is only about 23% of women. Yeah. Next, please. And also in terms of wages, yeah. So it's suggested that at least 50% of the world's women are in paid wage and salary employments. However, women earn only about 10 to 30%. Yeah, women earn 10 to 30% less than men. Yeah, for the same work. I think this is already discussed also. With the Prof. Katrina, yeah. That's how actually women's in the global economy is still very much underrepresented. Next, please. And also in senior management level, yeah, this is already discussed. Only 24 women CEOs, yeah, compared to only 1 in 1998. So there is only an increase of 23 women, yeah, since the past 20 years. And okay, this is the data from 2017 actually. Next, please. So now we are talking about women in the global pandemics, yeah. And so I would like to use the economic angles to discuss about these topics, yeah. As we are, most of us actually from the background of international relations, here I will try to discuss on how actually pandemic is actually a globalization phenomenon, yeah. It's a in this pandemic, we can see how actually globalization affect the everyday life of people. So when we talk about globalization, it's not only about the flow of goods and services, but also it's about how the this globalization affect our life. And in this case, actually, how the pandemic, yeah, the disease, the COVID-19 disease, that previously some of us was thinking that it's only happened in China, but then we can observe it happen almost all over the world. So this is actually one of the characteristic of globalization that we can see in this case. And how actually this pandemic eventually affect men and women differently. And we can we can see that this pandemic actually now it's not only about the bring the health issues, but also the economic issues. And some of the countries already declare they are now toward a crisis, economic crisis, yeah, because of because of the lockdown. It's difficulties in doing exports, and also almost difficulty in attracting investors, yeah, to invest in our countries. And so this is actually affect the the economic of many countries in the world, including Indonesia as well. And for women, actually, we can observe actually for women the effect of this pandemic even worse, yeah, because women typically many of us are women, yeah. We experience by ourselves that we juggle between earning and caring, yeah. So in one side we have some responsibilities, yeah, in our professional life, but also on the other side, yeah, we have also some caring responsibilities. And even actually, this is become more difficult for those that have no fixed income, yeah. They work in the informal economy, for example. And this crisis actually we observe is different, yeah. In the context of Indonesia, for example, this crisis in this COVID-19 pandemic is different with the crisis in 1998, for example. At that time, there are many women that involved in the informal sectors, especially for micro and small and medium enterprises yeah. They still able to produce and sell their product. But now become difficult because we have a lockdown. We have to stay at home, so it's we become a big challenge for women that work in the informal sector, in the macro and small industry, yeah, on how they have to survive. So there are some challenges and opportunities here actually for women, yeah. And some other women actually especially in rural areas actually, yeah. They in the rural, they try to manage how they can fulfill the needs of their family. For example, by conducting what's called the subsistence economy, yeah. So they try to plant some fruit, vegetables, yeah, in their neighborhood actually, yeah. So this is actually what women in Indonesia have done actually to survive in these pandemics. Next, please. Yeah, so it's what is the opportunities? We try to look at the positives, the opportunities, yeah, to the what's the encouraging side of this pandemics, yeah. We believe that women as drivers of people's economy, yeah, and women is everywhere in the formal, informal economy, from big to small or micro economy. And women as entrepreneurs actually increase rapidly, yeah, from time to time. And women in the informal economy, they involve in many parts of the chains, yeah, from produce the finished or half finished products, and some of them actually they produce high value products, yeah. And now actually because of this pandemic, many of them that previously they was working offline, yeah. And now there's actually a challenge for them actually to also use online platform, Instagram, Facebook, yeah, and other thing. And from my experience, actually, what I observed in Bali, for example, in Bali there are so many women that involved in informal sectors in home industry, yeah. Before they they hardly use online platform. But now, because there are no tourists come to Bali, for example, so the only choice they have to sell their product is to use the online platform. So they start to use Instagram, Facebook, and other platform, yeah, to sell their product. Next, please. Yeah, this is actually was some photos from my previous research, yeah, women in the informal sector. Next, please. Yeah. Yeah, next, please. Yeah, next, please. This is in Bali, actually. Next, please. Yeah, okay. And how I think now, yeah, in the new normal era, what is important for women is on how women have access to technology, especially women entrepreneurs and technology. Yeah, there is a growing number of women actually working as entrepreneurs. Yeah, and even actually I heard from the CEO of Facebook Indonesia. Yeah, she's a woman. So, she said that actually the Indonesian women's entrepreneurs are actually those that starting to use Instagram to sell their products. Before, all over the world, people use Instagram only to to save their photos, to share their photos like that. But now, but women of Indonesia actually the ones that use Instagram, yeah, to sell their product, and then followed by many women all over the world. So actually, there is already a sense of women of Indonesia actually on how to use this digital platform, yeah, for commercial purposes like that. And for women entrepreneurs in technology, this is actually based my previous research, yeah. Actually, there is degree of need of technology being felt by the women. This research actually before the COVID, yeah. So the thing that's okay if we think that this technology is good, can increase our sellings, for example. Okay, we will use. If not, no need like that. And the degree can this degree of need can be based on the scope of their business, yeah, small, huge, local, expanded, short, long chains of production, distribution, and the level of welfare. For example, the poor women actually they use less technology because they think that to use technology meaning that they have to buy gadget, they have to spend money for credits, for the cell phone credits and other things. And this is actually difficult for them, yeah. And so women entrepreneurs actually, as what I discussed before, they try to start to shift from offline platform to online, yeah. Use Instagram, Facebooks, yeah, Indonesian women pioneers, yeah, to use Instagram for business. And but the problem is digital media for women actually their access actually, is the access, internet access, for example, whether for all.
Sorry, Pandey, I have to remind you, we don't have a
Okay.
time.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Okay. This is there are some difficulty also faced by women, and however, actually, on the positive side, access to technologies actually make it possible for women for multitasking work. Next, please. Next, please. Yeah. Okay. This is actually just a glance of Indonesia was as a digital country. I think next, please. Yeah, because of the time. Next, please. Yeah, here I see actually the potential of the emerging of home-based workers, yeah, home-based work for women actually. Now even my friends actually, lecturers, researchers, they try to sell something. They try to open catering, they sell, you know, they sell masks, they sell hand sanitizer, many things. So actually, I see here women of Indonesia have a potential to, you know, to develop home-based work actually. And so home-based work in this is previously home-based work may be considered as not a work, yeah, just a secondary activity like that. But home-based work is actually a real work in the new normal, I believe. So this is home-based work now is I think increasingly significant, even primary, yeah, for the source of earning for women actually, because there are many employment now, yeah. So this is even become a source of earning for many families. An example of the home-based work that done by women so far in Indonesia, for example, food processing, handicraft, small garment, and other manufacturing. Next, please. Okay, this is a thing that I will not discuss. This is actually, I would like to show that actually on the legal basis, we already have enough legal basis there to support women's involvement in the economy actually. And hopefully, yeah, because now government also provide financial support, yeah, for entrepreneurs. Hopefully, women government also pay attention on the needs of women entrepreneurs and women in the informal sectors and women that actually marginalized, yeah, in the poor families from the village. So I hope that all women in Indonesia have the same access, the same opportunity to use to take benefits from the the money, yeah, the budget that already allocated by government, yeah, to help people to survive in this pandemic. I think it's enough for now, Ibu Tika. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much, Pandey, for sharing your research finding. Pandey has highlighted the impact of COVID-19 on women, but also she offered some solution for women to stay successful during the pandemic. I think it's very good. Now we are moving to the third speaker, Badrus Soleh, PhD. Currently, Dr. Badrus is Vice Dean of Student Affairs of UIN Syarif Hidayatullah, Jakarta. He got a master's degree from Australian National University, Canberra, and doctorate degree from Deakin University, Australia. His main interests and researches are in international security, counter-terrorism, and international conflict. Dr. Badrus, thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you.
Now I'm handing it over to you, please.
Thank you, Mbak Tika. Good afternoon, everybody. I will present on the issue of the role of women of the Islamic State during the pandemic era, and This is among important issue on the transformation of the Islamic State during the COVID-19 pandemic. It's important to understand the development or the how female is important aspect or important element of the Islamic State. It's very different from the period of Al-Qaeda or Jamaah Islamiyah in Southeast Asia. Women in Southeast Asia, most especially in Indonesia, have a role not only in strategic but also in tactical aspects. Women, could you move to next slide, please? Okay. So this is the statement in Instagram, Telegram of the ISIS called Akhwat Ghurabat. They say that if you do not go for jihad kita, fight for war, we female will go to join. So they have role in provoking men, provoking the male fighters to continue fighting, to continue terrorist operation, fight against police, against government, including against foreign people in Southeast Asia. And among their target currently is Chinese workers too. So, and the role of women is very, very important in recruitment, also in protecting their community. I will talk later how they have strong, very important, very pivotal role in managing resilience among the community. My interviews to the wife of Mujahideen, the wife of jihadis of Jamaah Islamiyah, she said that I prefer my husband to join for war on behalf of Islam, or go to Papua to fight against Christians there, than seeing him at home. This is statement of wife of Jamaah Islamiyah commander, and the commander already imprisoned for twice in Poso and in Jakarta, and she managed the family by herself, feeding 3 children, and while her husband at the prison. So many ISIS women have a very important role here, because more than 500 of ISIS, after the bombing of church in Surabaya, arrested, and women have role in managing the family, providing fund for raising their children, and this is an important role of women leadership in the Islamic State. For ISIS, COVID-19 is a punishment from God for the West, including for the Chinese. However, a Muslim of the Islamic State have to aware and avoiding the area of pandemic, including Europe and some area of pandemic. Women have women of the Islamic State have a very important role. They protect the community from economic crisis by welcoming male members to work at home industry managed by women community. Next slide, please. Okay, I will talk about how women, which is in my chapter in book of Gender and International Relations, women from Southeast Asia comprise only 13% of total around 1,000 fighters Islamic State in Syria and Iraq. It is the proportion is probably number 7. The first is East Asia, Europe, and Southeast Asia is number 7. But the number is only 120. It's not so many compared to other area, but when they return to their home country, to Indonesia, to Malaysia, to the Philippines, they have important leadership role in the community. So women, for example, during during this COVID-19 pandemic, they posting many important, for example, in Telegram, they say that see government or state are very weak now. So take advantage and carry out amaliyat. Amaliyat means terrorist operation as according to your capability. Do something good which will benefit to you and others for the sake of Allah. This is the posting in ISIS Telegram. So women always support men and including themselves, because many women in Southeast Asia, especially in Indonesia, they have already take suicide bombings in Indonesia, including in the Philippines as well. Another important aspect is the rise of recruitment in Eastern Indonesia during this pandemic. This is like a routine or response of conflict. When the conflict in Poso, conflict in Ambon and other area, ISIS recruits more than normal season. So during this pandemic, they have reason to recruit more. They build humanitarian actions for recruitment. They have fundraising from the community on behalf of fundraising for the pandemic. So the returnees of the Islamic State, around 100 of them, mostly women and children, they are rehabilitated in the government center. However, the problem with the rehabilitation is because government doesn't have enough capacity in funding in human resources for rehabilitation process. They only have 3 months in Handayani Social Department Center. And when they integrate to the community, they return to their hometown, to their villages. The community of Islamic State welcomes them, and they because they have experience in Syria and Iraq, including in Turkey, they have a higher position now in the community, becoming a leader. So women are pivotal element of resilience of the Islamic State during this pandemic, especially after total pressure, total arrest from the government and regional organizations after some attack operations. Women have role, especially in the aspect in education, in socio-economic sectors run by Islamic State. They welcome male members who lost their job to work in restaurant, in laundry, in tailor, in teaching, run by Jamaah Ansarut Daulah, affiliation of the Islamic State in Indonesia. And women have leading role in this economic sectors. Okay, next slide, please.
We have run of time.
Okay, 2 more minutes. I think it's important to see how Bloom say that government always underestimate the role of women in terrorism. and including women in Islamic State. This is important important note that especially how women, I mean how the moderate groups of women should have more or stronger role in not only in counter narrative but also in process of rehabilitation, in welcoming them for the integration process, and especially in coordination in their home countries. And this is the problem in Indonesia, and especially the coordination among ministries, relationship between civil society and government still very weak on counterterrorism, and especially how women not only as victims of many terrorism operation, but also they have become the leaders, they become important strategic role. In conclusion, as women have more important role in terrorism during the pandemic, women also women from civil society, moderate group should have a stronger role too in preventing terrorism, supporting government, but also they should establish strategic groups in social and religious organization run by mainstream organizations. Regional international cooperation on women on terrorism is very limited. I think there is a limited relation between Australia and Indonesia too on women on terrorism. So it needs more practical policy in national and regional organizations. Last but not least, we should involve more not only strengthening the implementation of laws on counterterrorism, but also implementing the policy. Counterterrorism still centralized by government. So it's time for civil society, it's time for academics to fight, to help fighting against terrorism, and especially the role of women on counterterrorism. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Patrus, for a very interesting presentation. We might wonder whether this woman should be treated as a hero or simply as a victim as a result of manipulation or abuse by patriarchy system. Well, we will discuss later. Okay? Now we are presenting the last speaker, the last but not least for today's webinar, Dr. Fitriani. She is currently a senior researcher at the Center Strategy and International Studies, CSIS, one of the leading think tank in international relation issue in Indonesia. Her main interest is in defense and security in Asia Pacific, women in peace and security, non-traditional security, and Indonesian foreign policy. Dr. Fitriani, I am now going to hand it over to you.
Thank you for having me. Good afternoon, my friends and colleagues in Indonesia, and good evening for those following in Australia. I don't know whether you get my slides because I send it quite late, but today my presentation will cover on the role of UN female peacekeeper in handling COVID-19 pandemic.
Okay, and, please be on time, 7 minutes, okay?
Okay. Should I share my screen or?
Yes, if you have, because you're quite late, so maybe you can collect it. You cannot collect.
Okay. 7 minutes. It's quite.
Okay, probably 8 minutes.
Thank you. Okay, I will share. Oke, presentasinya boleh bahasa Indonesia nggak? PowerPoint-nya bahasa Inggris? Atau if I can present, my slide is in English, so if my English does not, you can read it in English, but my mother tongue is Bahasa, so I would like to speak in Bahasa, if I may. Selamat sore, yang akan saya presentasikan hari ini adalah tentang peran pasukan perdamaian perempuan PBB dalam COVID-19. Bulan Agustus ini Indonesia memegang presidensi di DKPBB, karena sampai akhir tahun ini Indonesia duduk Dewan Keamanan PBB, dan Dewan Keamanan adalah yang yang mengotorisasi pengiriman pasukan perdamaian. Presentasi saya ada 4 urutannya. Yang pertama adalah bagaimana pasukan perdamaian itu berevolusi. Dia bagaimana karakternya dan apa yang terjadi sekarang. Bagaimana pasukan perdamaian itu ikut serta dalam penanganan COVID-19. Yang kedua yang saya akan bahas adalah landasan tentang Women Peace and Security Resolution. Itu adalah resolusi yang dikeluarkan oleh DKPBB. Dan ada beberapa resolusi DKPBB yang mendukung tentang bagaimana perempuan diikutsertakan dalam segala bentuk krisis di mana perempuan bisa berada dalam posisi rentan, karena ada berbagai jenis konflik, termasuk konflik di saat bencana alam, dan ini bisa dimasukkan dalam jenis bencana alam. Yang ketiga adalah bagaimana sejauh ini di dunia kita memiliki keterlibatan female peacekeeper, dan kedepannya bagaimana? Apa yang dari data yang telah saya kumpulkan, bagaimana kedepannya? Jadi yang pertama-tama apa itu peacekeeping? Peacekeeping itu dibentuk tahun 1948. Pada saat dibentuknya itu pertama-tama adalah di deploy atau ditempatkan saat konflik sudah selesai, di mana kesepakatan damai itu sudah berjalan. Maaf ya, saya ada anak saya, nggak apa-apa ya, dia ikut. Ya udah sini.
It's okay.
Oke, pasukan perdamaian itu bisa menggunakan militer kebanyakan karena kita tidak bisa mengirim orang masyarakat sipil secara umum ke daerah konflik atau daerah bencana karena akan menjadi lebih parah. Dan itu bisa terbentuk dua-dua, baik itu militer maupun polisi. Nah, dalam perkembangannya pasukan perdamaian itu tidak hanya militer saja, tapi ada upaya untuk misalnya mengirim dalam bentuk-bentuk lain. Dulu tuh kebanyakan militer, tapi sekarang ketika sudah harus mengamankan pembentukan negara, pemilu, dan juga dalam penanganan keteraturan masyarakat di saat pandemi. Sorry banget ya. Di saat pandemi ada perubahan dari bab PBB dalam keikutsertaannya. Jadi yang pertama itu adalah hanya diturunkan pada saat Pacific Settlement of Dispute. Itu berarti pasukan perdamaian baru dideploy ketika sudah ada persetujuan perdamaian. Yang kedua itu ketika ada suatu kondisi darurat di mana negara tidak bisa menangani kondisi itu sendiri, pasukan perdamaian bisa diturunkan. Ini pernah dilakukan pada saat penanganan krisis Ebola tahun 2011 sampai 2012 sampai 2014. Dan ini yang membuat penanganan Ebola di Afrika Barat itu ditangani dengan cepat. Dan ini waktu itu bisa dipropos Dewan Keamanan, tapi saatnya Dewan Keamanan saat ini sedang tidak berjalan dengan baik karena ada konflik antar negara besar yang kita tahu, Amerika dan China. Yang ketiga adalah aktivasi bab yang keempat tentang pengaturan kawasan. Nah, sejauh mana pasukan perdamaian ini terdiri dari perempuan. Ini adalah progresnya, bisa dibaca sendiri, tapi yang saya tekankan di sini adalah bagaimana sejak tahun 2000 kita memiliki resolusi Women, Peace and Security. Tahun ini harusnya ulang tahun ke-20 atau 2 dekade Women Peace and Security Resolution, di mana tujuannya adalah untuk meningkatkan partisipasi secara penuh dan aktif dan meaningful dari perempuan di bidang keamanan dan perdamaian. Nah, ada beberapa resolusi yang saya tampilkan di sini. Sejauh ini sudah ada sekitar 15 resolusi tentang Women Peace and Security yang temanya mengikutsertakan perempuan. Dia menjadi penting, kenapa? Karena sebelumnya di dunia penanganan konflik dan perdamaian itu jarang sekali melibatkan perempuan. Resolusi 1820 itu misalnya melihat bagaimana kekerasan seksual sebagai taktik dari perang, dan bagaimana resolusi 1889 itu diperlukan adanya target gitu, karena semua orang bilang kita lebih perlu banyak perempuan, kita lebih banyak perempuan bisa ikut serta, tapi apa targetnya gitu. Jadi resolusi tahun 2009 itu yang menunjukkan bahwa ini adalah goal-nya loh. Ini kita mau ada target dan ini targetnya. Sebenarnya ini ada target yang ketiga, ini selalu moving target. Tadinya targetnya 2015 gitu. 15 tahun dari resolusi Women Peace and Security gitu, yang pertama kali dikeluarkan. Tapi itu tidak tercapai. Jadi akhirnya dimundurkan lagi. Jadi realisnya kapan nih? Realisnya nanti mendekati SDGs 2030. Jadi kira-kira gini. Tapi sejauh ini jumlahnya masih berada di bawah. Dan resolusi tahun 2015 di situ dikatakan bahwa diperlukan peran perempuan termasuk pasukan perdamaian untuk menangani berbagai kondisi di mana perempuan berada dalam konflik. Nah, sejauh ini peran pasukan perdamaian ini adalah apa saja tugas mereka yang diberikan, tapi mereka mendapatkan tugas secara khusus tanpa adanya pelatihan tambahan, karena sejauh ini belum ada amandemen terhadap basic training untuk peacekeeper gitu. Nah, yang menjadi permasalahan adalah adanya endorsement terutama dari Undersecretary General di bidang peace operation yang mengatakan bahwa perempuan itu esensial gitu. Dan oleh karena itu perempuan harus diikutsertakan dalam respon terhadap COVID baik internasional, nasional maupun lokal gitu. Tapi kita menanyakan gitu, kenapa kalau peran perempuan dalam penanganan COVID ini sebagai pasukan perdamaian itu misalnya implementasi hygiene kit, sanitation policies, memberikan distribusi alat kesehatan, dan juga memberi penjelasan tentang misinformasi atau hoax yang ada di sekitar COVID. Nah, itu mengapa harus perempuan gitu? Katanya keikutsertaan perempuan itu bisa membuat pasukan perdamaian lebih ramah. Dia meningkatkan performance, kinerjanya diterima dengan lebih baik di masyarakat, aksesnya lebih bagus ke dalam kelompok perempuan, terutama adanya kepercayaan terhadap perempuan karena perempuan dianggap lebih jujur gitu, mengurangi konflik gitu. Jadi ketika ada kerusuhan biasa ada ketidakcocokan, ketegangan bisa yang diturunkan pasukan perdamaian perempuan, dan juga sebagai role model bagi perempuan di daerah misi. Nah, yang kita lihat di sini adalah bagaimana sebenarnya jumlah pasukan perdamaian perempuan masih sedikit, relatif cenderung sedikit. Karena ini adalah persentase yang negara-negara di top paling tingginya itu jumlah perempuan paling besar ya hanya 15%-an gitu kan. Jadi kalau kita lihat sebenarnya apakah ada kemauan untuk melakukan deployment atau pengiriman pasukan perdamaian yang lebih banyak. Padahal negara-negara itu di satu sisi melakukan embargo terhadap keluar masuknya
Dr. Fitri.
Sorry, yes. Dan Dan ada permasalahan-permasalahan yang secara spesifik dialami oleh perempuan yang tadi juga telah dibahas oleh Profesor Katrina, Liko, dan juga Dr. Ella dan rekan-rekan lainnya mengenai kekerasan domestik gitu, dan juga kekerasan struktural gitu, baik di bidang ekonomi maupun lainnya. Bagaimana peran pasukan perdamaian perempuan itu bisa berdampak atau lebih berdampak. Nah, ini adalah penelitian yang masih berjalan. Saya masih mengsegregasi data yang ada dan saya sudah berusaha membandingkan database, memasukkan datanya satu-satu karena itu bentuknya angka, jadi saya masih membagikan ke presentasi. Sejauh ini belum ada perubahan. Di sebelah kanan itu adalah grafik perbandingan jumlahnya tidak terlalu berbeda karena ini saya convert ke persen. Presentasi perempuan di pasukan perdamaian dari November 2019 sebelum COVID sampai sekarang saat ini jumlahnya masih stabil di sekitar 6,4-6,5%. Belum ada penarikan pasukan, belum ada deployment lebih banyak untuk pasukan perdamaian perempuan. Itu satu. Nah, padahal ada upaya untuk meningkatkan panggilan bahwa pasukan perdamaian perempuan lebih penting, adanya peran-peran tambahan. Gitu. Jadi tentu saja naratif dengan apa yang terjadi di lapangan itu berbeda. Nah ini menjadi satu permasalahan. Gitu. Yang kedua adalah meskipun sudah ada panggilan melalui resolusi Women, Peace and Security dan panggilan dari Undersecretary General tadi. Masalahnya adalah perempuan belum berada dalam suatu posisi leadership. Gitu. Jumlah perempuan yang menjadi force commander baru ada 2. Satu dari Norway, satu lagi dari Australia, dan deputy force commander baru ada 2 juga. Gitu. Bagaimana kita bisa mengharapkan peran perempuan berada dalam suatu posisi yang signifikan untuk membuat perubahan dan tidak hanya menjadi kelompok yang dikirim hanya untuk menjadi korban atau menjadi alat gitu tanpa memikirkan suatu strategi bahwa ini adalah kebijakan yang tepat untuk diambil gitu kan, atau memikirkan bahwa sebelum mereka dikirimkan apakah saya mendapatkan pelatihan yang cukup, apakah saya mendapatkan perlindungan yang cukup. Dan pertanyaan ketiga yang saya tanyakan justru kepada saya sebagai peneliti adalah karena ini adalah proses reflektif, ketika saya menanyakan mengapa peran perempuan, pasukan perdamaian perempuan ini esensial, apakah saya menjadi esensialis gitu? Apakah saya memainkan role bahwa saya menempatkan beban kepada pasukan perdamaian itu lebih hanya karena dia perempuan? Itu tidak adil. Mengapa? Karena kita selalu bermain dan kita membiarkan adanya peran-peran ganda terhadap perempuan. Dan itu menjadikan beban tanpa memberikan mereka misalnya upaya pelatihan lebih lanjut. Ada upaya misalnya dari LC Initiative yang dibiayai oleh Kanada dan Norway yang sedang melakukan assessment, yang melakukan itu Cornell University dengan DKF Geneva Center of Disarmament. Saya menjadi salah satu reviewernya, dia menganalisa 10 barrier bagaimana perempuan bisa masuki pasukan perdamaian gitu, dan ketika negara itu boleh menggunakan toolkit ini, dan ketika suatu negara kontributor itu mengetahui ternyata barrier dari negara kita itu ada di barrier struktural loh, enggak, barrier dari negara kita tuh barrier budaya loh, mereka bisa mengadres itu dan harapannya LC Initiative akan memberikan insentif berupa uang. Tapi pertanyaannya lagi adalah apakah negara dengan insentif uang itu akan bersedia untuk mengirimkan lebih banyak pasukan perdamaian gitu. Apalagi ketika kita mendapat pertanyaan ya, dalam penanganan COVID ini, perempuan di dalam negaranya juga mengalami double burden. Mereka harus bekerja di dalam rumah, harus menjadi ibu juga, menjadi pengajar di rumah, menjadi guru anak-anaknya. Apakah negara itu mau mengirimkan perempuannya, polisi dan militernya ke luar negeri menjadi pasukan perdamaian? Sekian dari saya, semoga saya tidak memakan waktu terlalu banyak.